but we are open to revisiting this in the future should your editorial direction change.
Everything just works. I was being sarcastic.
Before that, this video is brought to you by us and the 2020 Disappointment PC t-shirt. The best way to support Gamers Nexus and its testing, methodology, and special intros is to wear a constant reminder of the disappointment of 2020. 2020 feels like one never-ending year, and the back of the GN 2020 Disappointment t-shirt features major milestones like the AM bike, cold plate slime part 2, CPU naming schemes, power supply shortages, GPU availability, and 8 so-called K gaming. The worst fumbles on the back are presented like tour dates, and the front of the shirt features a PC component design with stock level indicators that we've all grown familiar with. The shirts are high quality prints and fabric, made with soft 100% cotton or popular tri-blend, and printed with sustainable water-based inks. You can visit store.gamersnexus.net or click the link below to grab one now, starting at $19.99. You know, for 2019's disappointment build after the impressive swath of disappointing products we had, I said, hopefully we can look forward to an equally disappointing 2020. So, sorry. Okay, well, 2020 certainly didn't disappoint if you were looking for disappointment. The biggest trend of this year in the hardware industry was a 3-act arc of trying to control media and the direction of media. That's something we'll be recapping again. In fact, 2020 was such an impressively long year that we had forgotten about the first 2 acts of the 3-act arc, the third one being NVIDIA's act, and then we had Deep Cool, and we had MSI mixed in there as well. So we've got a long year to recap, and for this one we're going to be going through some of the most disappointing launches and parts and trends of 2020. And for this, as noted, we do have our new shirt. I always like to talk about this because we put a lot of time into designing these for each year. These are not necessarily intended to be limited edition shirts, except by nature of printing 2020 on it and theming it around 2020. It is going to be limited just because we're not going to print a 2020 shirt forever. We will come back with a front design only at some point, but if you want one with the Disappointment Tour 2020 dates on it, then pick it up on store.gamersnexus.net. We did 2 runs of them last year for the 2019 edition. We sold through very fast, basically instant sell-through. So we're trying not to do that. We ordered a good amount of them, but hopefully, I guess it would be a fantastic irony if we also ran out of stock of our shirts. I promise they're not a paper launch. But anyway, some of the dates on it for this year. So first of all, Andrew did a bit of a red theme on it. We've got the front of it showing out of stock indicators for things, except for, of course, the case. There were plenty of cases to be had this year, just not a whole lot of anything else. And so we've got out of stock indicators that we've all become used to, but designed in a way that it doesn't necessarily come off too on the nose. And then on the back of it, reminders of BIOS reversal, heat pipe marketing at the beginning of the year. Probably everyone's forgotten this stuff by now. And all the way down to supply availability issues. There's the PS, memory thermal, ray tracing demands, the Killshot MSI controversy, and plenty of other stuff. And then for each of those, we've got different icons on the back representing the products. So anyway, if you want to grab one of the shirts, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net and pick one up. They're in cotton and in tri-blend, starting at $20. And we always sell through them very quickly, so make sure you grab one if you want one. let's go through a year of downsides for the hardware industry. So the year started off relatively innocently from a tech industry standpoint. Little did we know what we had in store later. It didn't involve global logistics or a pandemic or any of the other controversies that we'd unknowingly encounter later in the year. We were but naive hardware reviewers then, and that was the focus of what we were doing at the time. We weren't yet grizzled veterans of 2020. So it's hard to imagine that the RX 5600 XT launched in 2020, but in fact it did. Its life,
Have a
though,
tango.
the 5600
Good wing.
XT, it started with 2 BIOS.
Good wing. Have a
and that
tango.
was the year that one. That was the floor for disappointment in 2020. We thought it was a pretty bad start. We had no idea what was coming though. So the 5600 XT had a BIOS that, in the face of the
Run, man,
Super
run.
MTI, the two of which needlessly overlap each other, and the 2060, especially the new lower priced 2060s, in the face of that, AMD was forced to pull a classic AMD
I bought the hell
motion and panic and change everything last second and pretend like it was all planned. So AMD launched a second BIOS that was higher power consumption and higher performing and higher clock for the 5600 XTs, but it created a logistical nightmare for the partners in rolling that BIOS out. Not all the cards started with it, and some of the cards really couldn't properly support it without running a little bit on the hot side. So heat pipe marketing was another classic issue. This arose in February of 2020, and this was when we discovered that Deepcool had been falsely marketing its Assassin 3 coolers as being a combination of sintered powder pipes and grooved heat pipes. The Assassin 3 had marketing materials on every retail page that we found and product page that we found heavily emphasizing the benefits of having composite heat pipes with grooves and sintered powder, rather than just the sintered powder that we typically see, and it claimed that its, quote, grooves at sintered technology is 15% faster in heat conduction. And that's questionable for other reasons. But the company claimed that, quote, Deepcool CFD engineers took the lead in the whole R&D process of the Assassin 3. Hundreds of simulation and verification tests were made before its finalization. Apparently, though, at no point in this process did anyone cut the heat pipe open to make sure it was what they thought they were selling or what they thought they were buying from their supplier, to give them the benefit of the doubt. But when we cut the heat pipes open, something Deepcool didn't do themselves or didn't expect a third party to do, we found that it was only sintered and that there were, in fact, no grooves in these heat pipes, which was the major marketing point. The sad thing is that this cooler was actually pretty good overall, perhaps adding to the disappointment of the false marketing. Until we cut it open, however, we had no reason not to believe them. But now we'll forever question such claims. Deepcool even responded to our queries prior to publication, we gave them time to respond, and said this, quote, yes, it's sintered and not grooved. We misunderstood its interior structure from the very beginning. We confirm that it's just sintered. This point has been corrected from October, actually. Sorry that we didn't make it clear to you earlier. So it's not needed to mention that part. Thanks. This was actually worse because Deepcool admitted it knew about its own false advertising, but all of its product pages we found still stated that the heat pipes had groove sintered design that the company knew wasn't present, and this was many months later. B550 delays and B550A. The next topic on the shirt relates to the B550A motherboard, which was actually just a rebranded B450 motherboard that was done with a 100-digit increment in order to appease the system integrators so that they could make their new systems look like they have a newer motherboard in them in the form of B550A, which is, again, literally B450 with an A at the end and a 5 instead of a 4. So that, however, led into the bigger issue for the DIY community, which was the long delays of the B550 motherboards, which fed into a further still issue of the chipset outrage also featured on the shirt later in the year. So these delays triggered a cascade of problems for AMD. Because B550 had taken so long to come out, delayed past 2019, past CES 2020, and into June of 2020, many builders bought X470 or B450 motherboards that would later be declared incapable of supporting future GPUs. AMD was making moves to only support Zen 3 on the X570 platform and later release the B550 platform, but due to delays, the company walked into a minefield of its own making and had to backpedal its decision and re-engineer its AGISA binary to support new CPUs on 400 series platforms as well. This created logistical issues for the company and for the motherboard partners, and all relates later again to the chipset outrage that happened in May of 2020. Cold plate slime redux is the next one that we're covering from earlier in the year. So jumping back, the cold plate slime redux related to testing of the second iteration of Enermax's LickTech TR4 cooler that we showed in 2018, I think, and 19 for sure, where they had gunk buildup, corrosion, and became unbelievably nasty inside, but ultimately failed to work in any sense because it was so clogged up that you no longer got any cooling power. That happened previously, but this year what we did was take apart a couple of the revisions of it to see if the problem had been resolved. Lo and behold, it had not been resolved, and we sent off some of the cold plates to lab for X-ray analysis and determine some of the potential theories or hypotheses for the issues, a lot of them relating to metal choices and the quality of the water being used at the manufacturing plant. And our thanks to Mr. Fahrenheit, one of our viewers, for help with the X-ray analysis on that. A500 flatness and GDDR5 1650 up next. We'll skip through these two quickly. The A500 flatness is related to Corsair's return to air coolers, which included the invention of an excellent cold plate for testing thermal interfaces. That's because the early production runs of the A500 were so horrendously unflat that they produced a tool that we could use for testing how interfaces can conform to an unflat cold plate when you have large gaps between the cold plate and the IHS. As for the 1650 GDDR5 unit, well, that should have never existed under the name that it took because it becomes misleading and confusing for consumers when you're talking about functionally a same named card in nearly every aspect, except changing one thing at the very end. CPU names, annoying CPU names were shared by both AMD and Intel for 2020. Intel had it worse, following up its genius of the Intel Core i9-10980XE Extreme Edition CPU. It launched an entire series of confusingly named parts, to the extent that later in the year, Intel couldn't even remember the names of its own products based on what we saw in its presentation to media, in its laptop presentation. We even made a chart with how many times Intel named its own product as opposed to competing products, and the end result was, one, hopefully a lesson learned to Intel that its names need to be improved because its own staff can barely remember them, and two, that naming competitors constantly stands to only teach people the names of competing products. As for AMD, the company released some of the worst value CPUs it has ever created. The R7 3800 XT was particularly bad in an impressive way. It was priced the same way as the R9 3900X, but performing worse in nearly every single metric and running with a core deficit of 50%. And this was at the same price. This was AMD's first move towards trying to reestablish a higher price point or perceived value, and it did it with a product that should have never existed to begin with because Ryzen 5000 was just around the corner and the XT series barely did anything to improve in any aspect at all. The price going up by $100 certainly didn't help when compared to the non-key version of the parts that came out previously. The 3800 XT replaced a CPU that at launch was already a waste of sand given its price, and then furthered the waste of sand imbued with intelligence by slotting in at the same price point as the 3900X. The XT 3800 was fully killed and buried with the Ryzen 5000 launch if it hadn't already been killed at that point, where it proved worse than the entire lineup in gaming, and it wasn't that much later, and not better in most of the other applications either. That was the whole point of the XT refresh, by the way, was strictly gaming focused. Of course, Intel had its own disappointing CPU, the i5-10400, featuring all the usual locks in place, except at a time when Intel couldn't afford to be locking its own parts down. The R3-3300X was one of the first CPUs that launched in the year that started to preempt what would happen later of a lack of supply. Because if the CPU never launched. Keegan, the editor of a lot of our videos, was trying to buy a 3300X for his own system, and it had been delayed in shipping 2 times over a couple of months before he finally got one. That, however, wasn't as largely discussed online as the later Ryzen 5000 and RTX 3000 supply insufficiencies, or at least phrased maybe more appropriately, the impossibly high demand versus the supply capabilities, especially after the industry was recovering from reduced manufacturing potential from half of the year. In the middle of all this, Intel again expressed its fear of benchmarks and tried to refocus the media and its purchasers on the idea of, quote, real-world benchmarks, which of course, would precede the 11 series launch in the next couple months, if not sooner, where we assume Intel will undoubtedly want to shuffle back towards benchmarks and their importance. Among other stupid claims in the past year, Intel was At this point, an overturned turtle getting spun in circles by all of its competitors, including ARM and Apple, not just AMD. It retreated into its shell, and it later emerged, holding claims of 6 times more soldiers with its CPU versus AMD's. The best part, of course, is that they didn't make it obvious what that multiplier was calculated against. It wasn't the immediate competitors or the immediate predecessors, but older parts still. NZXT build. Mid-year, we did a sting operation on NZXT's BLD pre-built service, and we tested the customer service and build quality of the systems. NZXT's customer service exhibited the most demonstrable email and competency present at almost any corporation these days, which was an inability to answer one question in an email, even when bulleted and formatted. The company routinely ignored requests for assistance under our undercover emails, including complaints about scuffs or damage on the computer we had purchased. Now those were claims we had fabricated in order to test the support department. They weren't actually on the box, but NZXT never even asked for a photo, which seems like it could have really circumvented a lot of the waste of time in that thread, and you can watch the whole video for that, of course. The company then proved incapable of troubleshooting something as basic as an unplugged EPS 12-volt cable, and instead suggested that we ship an express across the country twice to fix a cable that was unplugged, which could then presumably come unplugged again and ship it. Instead, it assumed that there was a loose CPU, and that was causing the problem. But you can check out the video for that. And since then, NZXT claims it has improved its customer service policies. This all started after NZXT was responding to tweets for help from customers with memes and totally unhelpful responses, like just getting hard in response to a genuine customer question about removing the front panel of the case. The company continues to regress into the most immature possible version of a future dystopia where corporations mean with the best of them in a desperate, flailing appeal to youth. But now, with the latest on fire issue, it seems like there's been an injection of maturity. We hope that NZXT comes out ahead, because the company has been one of the easiest companies to work with that has really tried hard and has innovated.
Man, I was helping the other guy, the carry, not the support.
MSI Killshot up next. So now we get into the big stuff. Our MSI Killshot video came in response to MSI attempting to silence Tech Team GB's criticisms of the company by asking him to withhold publication of complaints, even going as far as offering cash in exchange for quote time, that is time spent on the review, on the insinuation that the review not be published. Tech Team GB did the right thing and published, and in response to MSI's behavior, we unloaded 5 years of behind-the-scenes ammunition about the company, where we tried unsuccessfully several times for half a decade or more to write the company's behavior and explain, hey, certain things you're doing are unethical, and here's how you fix that. And instead, they just kept doing those things, except through smaller channels, where we wouldn't be looking, apparently was the assumption. So we try to resolve these unethical behaviors from companies privately first, especially since language or translation or cultural barriers can come into play in some conversation. But MSI proved it was willing to continue, and apparently at directive of HQ, to try
Run.
So we buried Lucky the Dragon in that video intro, canceled an ad campaign with MSI and decided not to build them for the rest, and then reinforced Tech Team GB in taking a stand against the behavior. MSI later contacted us, thank you for the video, and said it would be working on improvements internally. We haven't heard from the company since then. We sincerely hope that the message has been gotten across, because again, it was half a decade or so of gentle reminders that, hey, this isn't how you should treat independent media, because then it's not independent media anymore. It's marketing. But we'll see. Maybe they won't have time. 12 fans, 0 airflow. Next on the shirt, we get back to a more trivial disappointment that's purely product-driven, our favorite kind of disappointment, and the better kind to deal with. This is in relation to the Abkin Core Ramses 780 or R780 case, which was sent to us by Brian of BPS Customs when he realized that shipping would be cheaper than the cost of bringing it to his local dump and leaving it there. The case featured what we've all wanted, airflow. Asterisk. It had 12 fans, but they were all covered by glass and steel. So not quite. It was an interesting case. It was a lot of fun to work with, but not for reasons that were good. We in fact cut our testing short because we became concerned about the health of the components when they were running as hot as they were. So 3 of the fans were custom molded to do even more of nothing than the others, and then the additional 9 fans beyond that conversely point to that solid panel. Next on the shirt is that of GPU availability and 8K gaming. Although we made jokes in the intro about paper launches, the reality is that several of these component launches weren't really paper launches, which is specs only, on paper only launch, but they were capable of meeting the pandemic after obviously having to do the manufacturing capabilities. The two together produced what appears to be a paper launch, except in some cases there were some genuine paper launches. End result, nothing's available, and that's the point of the line item. As for the 8K gaming, well, maybe one of those GPUs should have remained a paper launch. That would be the RTX 3090. It's advertised as a gaming GPU targeted for so-called so-called K gaming, even though it makes the most sense as an artist GPU for something like Blender because of its 24 gigabytes of memory at $1,500, which is actually extremely useful in 3D art, and maybe that's about it. Gaming, though, it's a stretch at best. So 8K, first of all, is 7680 by 4320. It's a far cry from 1080p or 1920 by 1080. Not anywhere close to the scaling we see there, hence 8 so-called K. NVIDIA made it seem like the 3090 card, again, best used for 3D art, would be the first real 8K gaming card. In actuality, it rarely broke 30 FPS in the tests that we ran for 8K gaming, and some of the paid influencer campaigns, sure, showed 60 FPS in Doom Eternal. But once again, 60 FPS in Doom Eternal could be achieved by a 1959 PDP-1. So it's not that impressive to be able to do that in the game. The company burned all of its social capital with a marketing campaign which at best was misleading. And this came in the form of paid marketing that went up before independent reviews, completely shifting the marketing in the last second before the game was launched. We're happy to shuffle and accommodate the renewed 8K obsession for our review. NVIDIA at this point had burned its capital on a troubled RTX 3080 launch and ran a deficit with the 3090 campaign. It wasn't long after this that instability issues plagued NVIDIA's 30 series reputation, pursuant to overly aggressive boosting that would later be resolved with drivers. The AM bike will be brief, but it was a fun one. AMD decided to slap its sticker on a bike, or perhaps more realistic, maybe one of Walmart's containers was accidentally rerouted to TSMC, at which point the company stuck stickers on it. But nonetheless, AMD attempted to launch the AMD Mountain Bike, labeled AM Bike, on our box when we received it. It was $350 shipped, and when we bought it, we first had trouble getting it out of the parking lot and then riding it down the sidewalk before things started breaking. That's how soon they broke. We then took it to some of my favorite mountain biking trails, and before publishing the video, we emailed AMD with a host of concerns we had about the product. That includes several safety concerns, some severe, like issues with braking, and the most severe of which was structural stability.
Is farming like crazy, man.
In the frame of the bike, where the head tube of a steel frame managed to crack after just a couple hours of riding, and could potentially shear the head tube and through your chin, but that's another story. And it wasn't until after our video that AMD fully responded, and the response was to kill the product and to offer a refund to all purchasers. Check out that video for more on that. In an impressive display of emotional incongruence, I guess, NVIDIA thanks reviewers Hardware Unboxed for its reviews of the RTX cards, and then stated that it would be pulling the use samples until the editorial direction changed. And that was the key phrasing that was truly problematic, although an email informing you that you're not receiving samples anymore is extremely uncommon, only so this in itself was out of place and out of character. And no reviewer is entitled to review samples, to really make that clear. We also could buy them. It's the matter of getting them sometimes, like this year. But sending an indiscriminate threat functionally to a reviewer that could be described even by Koalamus himself as damaging to the credibility of the entire industry is probably not the best move, because this undermines and subverts the coverage of NVIDIA's own technologies, the genuine coverage that's not paid for, and it starts to make it look like everything is paid for or is done out of fear, both of which are bad things as consumers become increasingly aware of the paid influencer campaigns that NVIDIA especially is pursuing right now. This straightforward, saculiform, self-owning sanction serves more as an insanable double shot to Sabaton than its reputation-rooted salvific intent, and the response to which wiped NVIDIA's scatterphagous brilliant off the stage. It ended up backpedaling and apologizing twice. The real problem, again, was not one of who gets samples or who doesn't, but the message sent by NVIDIA knowing full well that it would go public. And knowing full well, just like MSI, that it might be able to get away with spawning a hobgoblin in the minds of reviewers less equipped to strike out on their own, especially the smaller reviewers or the upstarts. It's precisely in line with what MSI did to get in trouble with us earlier this year, but perhaps more egregious. NVIDIA ultimately apologized profusely. It walked back its statements and its decisions, but we wonder whether it'll just wait until the rallying reviewers look elsewhere to try it again. And the end result of this, of course, is that newer reviewers, smaller reviewers, reviewers with less ability to just buy the cards that they want to review, might have this email in the back of their heads when they're working on content. And whether or not it's directly the content being written, this is a problem. NVIDIA, it seems, is moving away from supporting independent reviewers and towards instead a influencer-specific campaign approach where it's supporting people like streamers, which nothing against streamers, but it is primarily moving towards supporting people who are not going to review the product and instead are going to just use the product to play the games or do whatever it is they normally do. And that's, again, not a thing about those professionals. We know those people, a lot of them, and we've worked with them in the past too. It's also an important or an entertaining job, but it's a statement about NVIDIA and its level of confidence that it can start to move more in the direction of purely campaigns away from reviews. We'll see how long this apology stands before something like this happens again. But that's it for the disappointment build of 2020. Thank you for watching. The intro was a lot of fun to make. We think it's our best one yet. You should check out the series of them. We've published one each year for the past several years now. I think this is the fourth. And of course, you can go to store.gamersaccess.net to pick up one of these shirts, the Disappointment 2020 shirt. We've got one run of inventory in now that will be shipping in about 3 to 5 days after this video goes live. And then if they run out, we'll get more in ASAP.
I made you invisible.
Just assume that it's part of the team. Run out of stock. It'll fit at least. Or you can go to Patreon.com/GamesNexus. Thanks for helping out, and we'll see you all next time.
Guess we better.
Yep.
Now what we need to do is fly. Double kill! Oh no. See what kind of uploads we get from that. From memory. We'll have a whole separate video on this stuff coming up in very short order. It's getting edited now, so you can check back to the shorter recap of the benchmarks and games and stuff. Shmimi, 350. Don't let the monster sneak up on you.
Your middle tower is under attack.
Just keep an eye on behind you in case there's a monster. $5 for blue paper towels and rubbing alcohol. Thank you. I use rubbing alcohol now, but last time I $5 would not have got me. I might have gotten more a symbol of rubbing alcohol. I've been trying not to use all of it. We're gonna have trouble getting more of it. Okay, so let's apply that profile I had, and I'll walk through the way I go through the memory stuff. You know, my way. Obviously, I'm not an expert at memory at all, even close to it, but.
Got him with a rocket, long shot. What the hell?
Your top tower is under. Yep. Guess we better.
Yep.
I'm going with body sniper.
Running's not as fun as hitting.
Not one bit fun.
Hit the road.
Ow! My turn. Yep.
Yep. Was that a squirrel?
Come on! Good idea!
Bounty.
I'll do legs this time.
Okay. I saw a thing.
Huh?
After you.
After you!
Let me through.
Ow!
More fun this way.
You
You
go
go
first.
first!
I'll make you invisible, sniper.
Yeah.
Me first! You're doing good!
You too. Good idea.
'Cause it was mine. Here we come!
Oh,
Okay?
when can I hit something?
Who's stopping you?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I know it. This way.
That away!
In the stringer.
Get going!
On it.
Let's go invisible.
No.
Middle tower is under attack.
Killing spree.
Out of my way!
Damn.
Your middle tower is under attack.
This for the Magi.
Magi!
Guess we better.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's go north!
No, south. Can we get a light? Oh,
Okay?
Your bottom tower is under attack.
yep. I think I just got smarter.
No. Let me!
No, me.
I'm not ready.
Hit the road.
Ow!
Your bottom
Mega kill.
Some things we weren't meant to see, such as tomorrow.
Hit me.
No! Again and again!
That's how we do.
Pure skill!
Running's not as fun as hitting.
Not one bit.
How many levels is that?
One?
This will come in handy.
Good idea.
Cause it was mine. Good idea.
radiant structures are fortified.
Let me through.
Ow!
They all here. Careful.
Double damage on troll.
Help!
I'll do legs this time.
Where's that funny light come from?
Okay, he's dead.
Dire structures are fortified. Your top tower is under
Can someone TP? I don't have TP.
tower has fallen. Your top barracks are under attack.
Get rid of me.
Your middle tower has fallen.
Every revolution begins with a hard pivot.
Sure. After you.
After you.
You can't take a step forward without a leap of faith. No one can change the world without a wise investment.
When can I hit
We
something?
can ironically use
stopping you?
cliches like that without being kind of a horse's ass. And yet, like the Prius owners that came before them, Tesla enthusiasts hold themselves not as mere car buyers, but as sponsors of an electrified future. The next leap forward for the automotive industry and therefore the world. Which was fine when all Tesla needed to do was sell a handful of expensive sports cars to the opponent. But the thing is, the Model Y is Phase 3 is so have they done enough to attract
Sorry, man.
the answer is
I took it.
given the choice to have any part of
No, it's okay. I think we got it.
ultimately chose
Can we kill someone?
Y. And they were kind enough to let so I can share my thoughts. So why don't we go for a ride? Sometimes the key thing you gotta it's usually
Yeah, you guys got it.
Out of my way.
Here we were. Go get the line.
This way.
That away.
Everything about the Tesla experience is different, starting with the dealership. Tesla can call it whatever they want, it's still a dealership. We booked our test drive, ultimately decided on the car, and then
Come on,
got a
dude, we need
notification
you.
a whopping 4 weeks early that it was ready for pickup. So far, so good.
Don't wait till the light.
That's basically where the positive customer service experience ended.
Guess we
They've
better.
been very slow about communication, and supposedly due to COVID, my poor boomer in-laws only got about 15 to 20 minutes of FaceTime with a Tesla representative, and were directed to watch a series of videos to learn how to drive the car on their own. Now, for a tech-savvy Tesla buyer,
Running's nice, fun is hitting.
Not one bit
but
fun.
given that most of our audience is the person who their parents or grandparents all up to the I'm sure you'd appreciate if that first hour or two was offloaded to the dealer. Another difference with the delivery compared to the normal car is inspecting your vehicle for obvious PC problems. This one had a random red marks on it, a misaligned panel, and with a broken wall charger at the wall. To Tesla's credit, they did send a technician to
It doesn't have BKB.
But you're gonna have to do it again because as I arrived on set, Alex actually pointed out that one of the rear lights has a seal problem and has condensation in it. So time for round 3. Tesla makes it very easy to overlook these kinds of things though with one simple trick. By creating a product that looks and feels so futuristic compared to anything their target customers had ever seen that they will bend over backwards to ignore its flaws. And honestly, I'm not immune to it. Here's something I noticed really
No, that's just like by mistake. It's not
took me no less than 15 seconds
Just
and
don't
it
die.
repairs every time flawlessly.
Hey, why?
The quality of the background camera on a huge screen means I basically never looked in my rearview mirror. The audio volume dips subtly when a door is open to make it easier to greet a passenger. And the touchscreen is as responsive as a phone or a tablet. All these things coming together is how Tesla somehow manages to have both some of the lowest rated initial qualities of any auto manufacturer, according to JD Power, while also maintaining the highest owner satisfaction, according to Consumer Reports. But maybe there's an even simpler reason people love this thing so much. Me driving the Model Y was unlike any other car that I have ever driven. All the way from a Geo Metro 3-banger to a Ferrari something or other on a track in Vegas. Just map the accelerator. Go from 0 to 60 in just 4.6 seconds. And the party keeps on going past the speeding ticket all the way through town.
What comes after two?
As someone who's not used to it though, having 384 horsepower and 376 torques available made me immediately prefer chill mode, which smooths out the acceleration for a more chill, not to mention more economical driving experience. As for the handling, a low center of gravity and responsive steering made it feel less like operating a large heavy vehicle and more like a small remote controlled toy one. Like with any new toy though, whoa, slow down, I need chill mode, quickly turned into, what can this baby do? And I have the bottom line is performance in a car that I've never really felt before. And by far, the latest thing about going back to my Volt from this is the passing ability.
Who's stopping
You
you?
don't have to be going 0 to have it check this out. We're at 95 kilometers. Hello! And this is the long-range model. It's not even the performance one.
But if you're like me, Linus's opinion can only hold so much weight. Like, he kind of enjoys the vagueness of the Volt. So take it from me, someone that basically did a master's in suspension design instead of actually doing my coursework. So this really unfortunate thing happened between days 1 and 2 of this. A big rock
Let me go
hit the
first.
windshield of Linus's in-laws car. So we have the fastest Model Y performance around. Accelerator. Very impressive, but at the same time, I don't know if it's worth the premium over the standard one. So the electrical torque is still there. Like, this is impressive. The other one is too. Once the handling on the surface and on the back you get a multi-link design that actually contains the rear powertrain to isolate all of the bumps and stuff from the chassis and the rest. All of this, along with a low center of gravity, translates into corner speeds that are hard to believe with a 4,400-pound car. But the problem is that you can huck it into a corner, although you don't really feel what the steering's doing. The electronics just kind of come in and there's a bit of understeer. I don't know what's happening. It's going really fast. But I feel like, you know, on a long, twisty road, you have a lot more space.
Only car nerds care about handling on the track though. Most people just want a nice space to exist in for the duration of their commute. And it's quite a nice space to spend your time. I have my doubts about the upcoming 7-seater being comfortable for anyone over the age of about 13.
We were killing someone on their high ground.
Front seats are reasonably comfortable with all the adjustments I'd expect, and the rear seats have
When can
heaps
I
of
hit
room.
something?
Tesla does benefit a little bit from the MacBook Pro effect as far as their interior goes, though, where someone that's only ever owned a $500 Dell runs out, buys a $3,000 MacBook Pro, but without ever trying
Killing spree!
I mean, in fairness though, that is Tesla's plan, right? Turn non-car people into car people with their sheer sex appeal, and then hopefully figure out how to get better at building cars before
Double kill!
Here's a Tesla, how much they suck for the price. And I was briefly converted to the car guy's side when I test drove an Audi Q5. The second I sat in it, I was like, oh, yeah, now I get it. Until minutes later, the Audi Q5 was disqualified by the uncle when the sales rep explained that it doesn't have a touchscreen because you input text by drawing little letters on a touchpad like you're in kindergarten learning to finger paint. It's like, what?
Okay.
Honestly, watching the sales rep try and sell that kind of oversight on a vehicle that costs Alright then, this is the part where I tell you the Tesla tech is mind-blowing and the reason you should buy this car right now. For the most part, I love the ability to use performance key and front control. They they've also managed to make most basic car controls work well on a touchscreen, something that pretty much every other car company is doing. But when it comes to entertainment and navigation, honestly, hold on.
How?
Didn't think so. Games from our team just upgraded to a Model 3 and has exactly the same feedback. Now, everything there's not even a button to voice it.
No, by the
Get past now. Go back to the why can't right in a window or something? You know, the kind of thing we totally could do. Any other manufacturers have done it. Tesla, like Apple, doing what's best for their customers, better than their customers do, and they like it this way. With that said, it's not like Tesla does everything wrong as far as software goes. Updating the OS on, say, a Ford sucks. Over-the-air updates remain one of Tesla's biggest advantages, although some traditional auto companies are matching it now, or at least offering some way to update the infotainment system. And we have to give Tesla credit. It's and it's a really important one, because as vehicles get smarter, there's going to be a lot more things that need updates.
Don't rush, I'll look at 13 seconds, I don't want that.
Allowing easy
Yeah, just let them, don't push.
And it even works at low enough speeds that I can use it in school zones.
Only 20
in
seconds.
Practice, I actually found myself using it a lot less than I expected. One of the things I noticed often was that it was on adaptive until you stop the vehicle, like at a light. It
Don't chase, don't chase. I have 10 seconds.
Vehicles in front beginning to accelerate once the light changed, so the car would end up slamming on the brakes and then gradually increasing my speed again. I know that wasn't necessary. My most frequent passenger, my wife, is susceptible to motion sickness.
No, don't die. Sniper, get back, sniper.
Full self-driving package, because from my point of view, $8,000 is an awful lot of money to effectively beta test for Tesla. So my expectations were pretty low, but even then I was still disappointed when the automatic lane departure started bouncing me back and forth.
Yeah, I think the Roshi is off.
Second chance! Angles, until finally I had to take over, since it was just going to drive right over the line. Now there's a good reason that autopilot is basically banned in the EU. In North America, when a Tesla smashes into a stopped car or something, we will jump to the driver. Oh, they were reading a book or playing a video game. In Europe, they've realized that these behaviors are just as simple as telling people that their car has autopilot technology. What autopilot sounds like. And Tesla makes matters worse for themselves with their lack of transparency about the safety of autopilot. Forbes found autopilot to be about equal, if not more, car when the numbers are properly represented. Straight up suck. And a German judge recently ruled that the method of manually adjusting the wipers on the touchscreen is classified as and honestly, for good reason. What is this? I mean, I wouldn't even mind so much if the wipers could be easily controlled from behind the steering wheel, like most cars. But no, Tesla insists you do every damn thing with the touchscreen. They even have wiper controls on the stop, but only for cleaning or a single wipe, not for actually setting the wiper speed. Dinking around with my wipers in the dark, in the rain, on a touchscreen is not safe, and I should never have to do that, period. So now we're going to get into the real answer to the question I posed in my Chevy Volt video. Why didn't I buy a Tesla for myself? It's not because of range anxiety. I feel like being able to charge the car at home more than offsets that. Or the QC. It's not something that is bound to improve as we
Did you guys take the refresh?
It's because liking the car, and I do, doesn't mean that I like the policies and the behavior of the car. It is without a doubt better than sticking with gas. But in other ways, they seem to be regressing. One of the anti-consumer things about the company, it's noisy squawking when things are going well, then utter lack of transparency when there's bad news or a data point that doesn't fit the narrative, is poised to take a nosedive moving forward. Elon wants to have the benefit of his business openly brags that his company doesn't even advertise, but can also alienate portions of his most loyal customers when things don't go his way without a PR department. Spontaneous after a ride through a puddle or a roof that flies off a vehicle on the way to
Killing spree!
actual safety records just as irresponsibly puddle climbing. What about the inconsistent policies with respect to their handling of customer data, their opposition to right to repair, and the fact that they don't follow through on promises, like saying they will repair their software
Double kill!
Middle tower is under attack.
Mega kill! Triple kill!
I got all of them,
A lot of
man.
thought has gone into making the experience, like I said, unlike anything else on the market. But part of loving something is wanting what's best for it, which means being honest with it and honest with yourself. Moves like building repeated scenes into every vehicle and then charging you a microtransaction later are already being offered by the rest of the as test bottom. So that's a question you should always be asking yourself. Should I still be okay with someone other than Test to do it? If the answer is no, you've got to send a message. As for how you do that, well, you don't have a PR company. But I think Mr. Musk is pretty into the whole good part.
Unstoppable! That's wicked sick!
Sponsoring this video. The DJI Magi Air 2, which we used for all of our in-air footage for this video, has the ability to shoot video in HDR, take panoramas in HDR, and record
They don't have any
photos
buyback.
with
Do you guys
more
have
dynamic
buybacks?
range.
We can finish.
Currently, no other DJI drone offers all three of those HDR features, particularly HDR video.
Running's noise
It's
fun
got
is
48
hitting.
megapixel photo mode, allowing you to shoot
Alright,
with high
let's
dynamic
go
range.
top, see if I can
Up to
get
48
it.
megapixels. It features hyperlapse, which enables you to capture the passing of time in a pretty unique way. And the latest firmware update now includes digital zoom in 1080p, 2.7K, and 4K. I'd also, by the way, love to show up Mission Raceway, Stabilized Cinemas, and Would You Stable.
No, I think I can get it.
Paloma, she was awesome. She was amazing. What a trooper she was. And a couple more things. I couldn't find a spot for it. The audio system,
Yeah.
not very good.